Hi, I'm Marcus. My brothers threw me out of the family business, calling me a worthless dreamer who'd never amount to anything. They stripped my name from the company letterhead and told everyone I was dead weight. But when our father passed away last month, his will reading revealed something that left them speechless. I didn't just inherit the family fortune, I inherited everything they thought belonged to them. And the look on their faces when the lawyer read those words? Priceless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first crack in my relationship with my brothers appeared on a Tuesday morning in September 3 years ago. I was 26 then, fresh out of graduate school with an MBA that had cost Dad more money than my brothers thought I was worth. I'd spent 2 years studying sustainable business practices and renewable energy solutions, convinced that our family's construction empire needed to evolve with the times. The world was changing, and I wanted us to be ahead of the curve, not scrambling to catch up when regulations and market demands shifted beneath our feet. Walker Construction had been in our family for 43 years. Dad built it from nothing, starting with a borrowed truck and a handful of tools, working 18-hour days pouring concrete and framing houses in the suburbs outside Phoenix. By the time I was born, we owned the largest commercial construction firm in Arizona, with contracts spanning from shopping centers to office complexes. My oldest brother Ryan had been groomed to take over operations since he was 16. Marcus, the middle brother, handled client relations and business development. They both lived and breathed construction the way other people lived and breathed oxygen. Me? I was different. I'd always been different. While Ryan spent his summers learning to operate heavy machinery and Marcus charmed potential clients at golf courses, I was reading about green building certifications and studying how companies in Europe were revolutionizing the industry with sustainable practices. I saw opportunity where they saw complications. I saw the future where they saw unnecessary expenses. That Tuesday morning, I walked into our downtown office building with a leather portfolio containing 6 months of research. I'd prepared a comprehensive presentation about transitioning 30% of our projects to sustainable building practices within 2 years. The numbers were solid, the market research was thorough. I'd even identified 3 potential partnerships with renewable energy firms that could save us millions in long-term operational costs while positioning us as industry leaders. The conference room smelled like coffee and ambition when I set up my laptop. Ryan sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, wearing the same skeptical expression he'd perfected since childhood. Marcus lounged in his chair, scrolling through his phone with the air of someone who had better places to be. Dad sat quietly at the far end, hands folded, waiting. I began my presentation with confidence. I showed them market trends, profit projections, competitive analysis. I explained how sustainable construction wasn't just an environmental responsibility, but a business imperative. Companies that adapted early would capture the largest market share as regulations tightened and consumer preferences toward eco-friendly options. Ryan interrupted me 15 minutes in. "Marcus, this is fantasy," he said, not even looking at my charts. "We're in the business of building things people need, not chasing every trendy buzzword that comes out of California." I kept my voice steady. "This isn't a trend, Ryan. These are industry projections from the National Association of Home Builders and the U.S. Green Building Council. The demand for sustainable construction has increased 47% in the last 3 years alone." Marcus finally looked up from his phone. "And what's our profit margin on these magical green buildings? Because last time I checked, our clients care about getting the most square footage for their dollar, not saving polar bears." The dismissal in his voice cut deeper than it should have. I'd expected resistance, but not mockery. The initial investment is higher, but the long-term savings, energy costs, maintenance expenses, tax incentives. "Tax incentives that could disappear with the next election," Ryan interrupted again. "Marcus, you've been in school too long. You're thinking like an academic, not a businessman." Dad remained silent throughout the exchange, his weathered hands resting on the table. He'd built this company with those hands, and I'd hoped he would see the vision I was trying to share. But when I finished my presentation, he simply nodded once and said, "Interesting research, son. We'll take it under consideration." That was Dad's polite way of saying no. The rejection stung, but I didn't give up. Over the following months, I continued gathering data, refining my proposals, looking for smaller ways to introduce sustainable practices without overhauling our entire operation. I suggested pilot programs, trial partnerships, even voluntary training sessions for our project managers. Each suggestion was met with the same pattern: polite listening, followed by practical dismissal. Ryan and Marcus had their own language, a shorthand developed over years of working together that I'd never been invited to learn. They would exchange glances during meetings, nod at unspoken agreements, finish each other's sentences when discussing project timelines. I was always one step behind, always explaining concepts they'd already decided weren't worth understanding. The real breaking point came during our annual company retreat in December. We'd rented a conference center in Sedona for 3 days of strategic planning and team building. The entire leadership team was there: project managers, department heads, senior foremen, along with our core administrative staff. It was supposed to be a collaborative environment where everyone could contribute ideas for the upcoming year. On the second day, during a session about future growth opportunities, I stood up to present a scaled-down version of my sustainability proposal. I'd spent weeks preparing a 15-minute presentation focused on just one potential project: retrofitting our own office building with solar panels and energy-efficient systems. It would serve as a proof of concept, demonstrating our commitment to innovation while providing measurable data for future projects. I made it through exactly 4 minutes before Ryan stood up. "I'm going to stop you right there, Marcus," he announced, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Everyone, this is a perfect example of why we need to stay focused on what we do best." 37 people turned to look at me. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but I kept my voice calm. "Ryan, if you'd let me finish, I think you'd see. What I see," he continued, "is someone who's been out of touch with reality for too long. Marcus wants us to spend $250,000 turning our office into some kind of environmental showcase, while we've got real projects with real deadlines and real profit margins waiting for our attention." Marcus chimed in from across the room. "It's like Dad always says, stick to what you know. We know construction. We've been doing it successfully for 4 decades. Why fix something that isn't broken?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The room was dead silent. I looked around at faces I'd known since childhood, men and women who'd watched me grow up in this business, who taught me how to read blueprints and calculate material costs. Some looked uncomfortable. Others nodded in agreement with my brothers. A few stared at their notepads, avoiding eye contact entirely. I should have sat down. I should have said thank you for the feedback and moved on to the next agenda item. Instead, I did something that would haunt me for months. "The reason we need to fix it," I said, my voice carrying farther than intended, "is because it will be broken soon whether we acknowledge it or not. The construction industry is changing whether we participate in that change or get left behind by it." Ryan's face darkened. "Are you suggesting that Dad built this company the wrong way?" The question was a trap, and I walked straight into it. "I'm suggesting that what worked 40 years ago might not work for the next 40 years. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on the room. Dad sat in the front row, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "I think we've heard enough new ideas for one day. Let's move on to the quarterly budget review." That evening, over drinks at the hotel bar, Marcus pulled me aside. His tone was different from his public persona, not mocking, just tired. "Look, Marcus, I get it. You want to make your mark, contribute something meaningful. But you're pushing too hard, and you're making Ryan look bad in front of the team." I sipped my beer, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not trying to make anyone look bad. I'm trying to help this company succeed long-term." "Success means different things to different people," Marcus replied. "For Ryan, success means maintaining the reputation Dad built and keeping our profit margin steady. For me, success means expanding our client base and growing our market share. For you, success seems to mean revolutionizing an entire industry." He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't entirely right either. I just think we're capable of more than we're attempting. Marcus signaled the bartender for another round. Maybe we are, but capability and opportunity aren't the same thing. And right now, pushing these environmental initiatives is creating more problems than it's solving. I stared into my glass, watching condensation drip down the sides. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you pick your battles more carefully, and maybe consider that sometimes the best way to contribute is to support what's already working instead of trying to replace it. That conversation marked the beginning of my isolation within the company. Over the following weeks, I noticed subtle changes in how my brothers interacted with me during meetings. They would discuss projects and decisions without including me in the initial conversations, then brief me afterward as if I were a junior employee rather than a partner. My office door, which had always been open for impromptu discussions, suddenly felt like a barrier between me and the rest of the leadership team. I tried adapting my approach. Instead of proposing large-scale changes, I focused on small improvements, using recycled materials when possible, optimizing waste disposal procedures, implementing energy-saving measures in our project trailers. These suggestions were acknowledged politely but rarely implemented. When I asked about follow-up on specific recommendations, I was told they were under review or being evaluated for feasibility. The turning point came in February, during a client meeting that would reshape everything. Pinnacle Development Group had approached us about a massive mixed-use project in Scottsdale, 200 units of residential housing, 50,000 square feet of retail space, and a 20-story office tower. It was exactly the kind of project that could define the next phase of Walker Construction's growth. The contract was worth $87 million, our largest potential deal in company history. Richard Pinnacle, the company founder, had specifically requested a meeting to discuss sustainable building options for the project. He'd heard about our company through industry connections and wanted to explore green building certifications, renewable energy integration, and environmentally conscious design elements. This was exactly the opportunity I'd been preparing for, a chance to demonstrate that sustainable construction wasn't just environmentally responsible, but financially advantageous. I spent 2 weeks preparing for that meeting. I researched Pinnacle Development's previous projects, studied their corporate sustainability goals, and developed a comprehensive proposal that addressed their specific needs while showcasing our potential capabilities. I calculated cost savings, identified tax incentives, and created detailed timelines for LEED certification processes. Everything was ready. The morning of the meeting, I arrived at the office early to review my presentation one final time. Ryan was already there, sitting in the conference room with Marcus and Dad, looking over documents I hadn't seen before. "Marcus," Ryan called out as I passed by. "Good, you're here. We need to talk before the Pinnacle people arrive." I joined them at the table, my portfolio in hand, ready to coordinate our presentation strategy. Instead, Ryan slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "We've decided to take a different approach with this client," he said. "Marcus will handle the presentation. You'll observe and take notes." The paper was an outline of talking points focused entirely on our traditional construction capabilities, project timelines, cost efficiency, reliability, previous commercial successes. There was no mention of sustainable building practices, renewable energy, or any of the environmental considerations that Pinnacle had specifically requested. "Ryan, they asked about sustainable options. That's why they wanted this meeting." Marcus leaned forward. "They asked about sustainable options because they think they want sustainable options. Our job is to show them what they actually need, a building that's delivered on time, under budget, and built to last." "But if we don't address their sustainability goals, they'll just go to a competitor who will." Dad spoke for the first time. "Son, we've been reading clients correctly for 40 years. Trust us to handle this one." The meeting began an hour later. Richard Pinnacle arrived with 2 associates, his head of development, and a sustainability consultant they'd hired specifically for this project. They were professional, prepared, and clearly excited about the possibility of working with us. For the first 20 minutes, Marcus delivered his presentation flawlessly. He outlined our company history, highlighted our most impressive projects, and demonstrated our capacity to handle large-scale commercial construction. The Pinnacle team listened politely, asked appropriate questions, and seemed genuinely impressed with our track record. Then, Richard Pinnacle asked the question I'd been expecting. "We're particularly interested in your experience with sustainable building practices. Can you walk us through some examples of your green construction projects?" Marcus didn't miss a beat. "Absolutely. While we haven't specialized in what some people call green building, we've always prioritized efficiency and quality in our construction methods. Our projects consistently come in under budget and ahead of schedule, which I think you'll find is the most sustainable approach to construction, not wasting time or resources." The sustainability consultant, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, leaned forward. "We're looking for specific environmental certifications, LEED Gold minimum, potentially LEED Platinum. We want solar integration, rainwater harvesting systems, energy-efficient HVAC, sustainable material sourcing. Do you have experience with these elements?" I could see Marcus calculating his response, trying to find a way to reframe our traditional methods as environmentally conscious. But there was no way around it. We simply didn't have the experience they were looking for. "We believe in practical sustainability," Marcus replied. "Building structures that last for decades, using proven materials and methods, focusing on long-term durability rather than experimental technologies that might not stand the test of time." Richard Pinnacle and his team exchanged glances. Dr. Chen made notes on her tablet. The energy in the room shifted subtly but noticeably. "I appreciate that philosophy," Richard said diplomatically, "but we have specific corporate sustainability commitments that require measurable environmental benchmarks. We're looking for a construction partner who can help us achieve those goals, not just deliver a traditional building efficiently." The meeting concluded 20 minutes later with polite handshakes and promises to follow up soon. As the Pinnacle team left, I could see the disappointment in their faces. They'd come looking for innovation and left with assurances about traditional reliability. That afternoon, I knocked on Ryan's office door. "We lost that contract," I said without preamble. Ryan looked up from his computer. "The meeting went fine. They seemed impressed with our capabilities." They seemed polite. There's a difference. They asked specific questions about sustainable construction, and we gave them generic answers about efficiency. "Marcus, sometimes clients think they want something they don't actually need. Our job is to guide them toward practical solutions." I sat down across from his desk. "Ryan, what if they actually do know what they need? What if the practical solution is learning how to deliver what they're asking for?" He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same expression he'd worn since we were children, patient but condescending, like an older brother explaining why the younger one couldn't play with the big kids. "Here's the thing, Marcus. You've been out of the real world for 2 years, studying theories and best practices and industry trends. But while you were in classrooms, Marcus and I were here, building relationships, managing projects, keeping this company profitable. We know our clients. We know what works. And what if what works is changing? Then we'll adapt when we need to. But we won't chase every new trend that comes along just because someone with a PhD thinks it's the future." I left his office that day with a growing certainty that my brothers and I were fundamentally misaligned about the direction of our company. But I wasn't prepared for how quickly that misalignment would become an unbridgeable divide. 3 days later, I received a call from Dr. Sarah Chen. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. Richard Pinnacle asked me to follow up with your company about the sustainability components of our project." "Of course, what can I tell you?" "Honestly, we were hoping to get more specific information about your green building experience. The presentation focused heavily on your traditional construction capabilities, but we really need to understand your capacity for sustainable construction methods." I took a deep breath. This was my moment to either maintain the company line or tell the truth about our limitations. "Dr. Chen, I appreciate your directness, and I'm going to be equally direct with you. Walker Construction has extensive experience with traditional commercial construction, but we have limited experience with the specific sustainable building practices you're looking for. However, I've spent considerable time researching these areas, and I believe we could partner with specialized consultants to deliver exactly what you need." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's refreshing honesty. Most construction firms would have tried to convince us they could handle everything in-house. Can you tell me more about your research? For the next 40 minutes, I found myself in the kind of conversation I'd been hoping to have for months. Dr. Chen asked detailed questions about LEED certification processes, sustainable material sourcing, energy-efficient building systems, and renewable energy integration. I was able to answer most of her questions and acknowledge the areas where we would need additional expertise. Marcus, this has been incredibly helpful. Would you be willing to put together a more detailed proposal based on our specific sustainability requirements? I think Richard would be very interested in seeing what you could develop. I agreed immediately, knowing I was stepping into territory that my brothers had explicitly avoided. But I also knew this was exactly the kind of opportunity that could transform our company's capabilities and position us for long-term success. That evening, I stayed late at the office, working on a comprehensive sustainability proposal for the Pinnacle project. I researched potential consultant partners, calculated cost implications, and developed a timeline for achieving LEED Platinum certification. It was exactly the kind of work I'd been trained to do, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was contributing something valuable to the company. I was so focused on the proposal that I didn't notice Ryan's car in the parking lot when I left the office at nearly midnight. The next morning, I arrived to find Ryan and Marcus waiting in the conference room. The atmosphere was tense before anyone spoke. "Marcus, sit down," Dad said quietly. I took a seat across from them, my laptop bag still in my hand. Ryan leaned forward, his voice controlled but angry. "Dr. Chen called me yesterday evening. She told me about your conversation and your offer to develop a sustainability proposal for their project." My stomach dropped. I'd been so excited about the opportunity that I hadn't considered how it would look to my brothers, like I was going around them to pursue a direction they'd explicitly rejected. "Ryan, I can explain." "You can explain why you contradicted our company position and made commitments we can't fulfill?" "I made commitments we could fulfill with the right partnerships and preparation." Marcus spoke up. "Marcus, you told her we had limited experience with sustainable construction. You made us look incompetent." "I told her the truth, and I offered a solution." "The solution," Ryan said, "was the approach we presented in the meeting. Traditional construction done efficiently and reliably." Dad had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he cleared his throat. "Son, I think you misunderstood your role in this company." The words hit me like a physical blow. "My role? You're a junior partner. Your job is to support the decisions that Ryan and Marcus make, not to freelance your own business development." I looked around the table at the three men who'd shaped my understanding of business, family, and success. For the first time, I realized that they didn't see me as a partner at all. They saw me as an employee who happened to share their last name. "Dad, I was trying to help us win a contract." "You were trying to prove that your approach was better than ours," Ryan replied. "And in the process, you undermined our credibility with a major potential client." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, but the outcome was predetermined. I was removed from the Pinnacle project entirely. Marcus would handle all future communications with potential clients. My focus would be shifted to internal operations, project scheduling, material procurement, administrative oversight. I'd been demoted in everything but title. Over the following weeks, the distance between my brothers and me grew wider. They would have conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Meetings were scheduled without including me. Decisions were made and communicated to me after the fact, rather than developed with my input. The final blow came in April, during our quarterly board meeting. Walker Construction was structured as a family partnership, with Dad holding 51% ownership, and Ryan, Marcus, and I each holding 16 1/3%. In theory, this meant I had equal standing with my brothers in company decisions. In practice, Dad's controlling interest combined with Ryan and Marcus's unified approach meant that I was always outvoted 3-1. The April board meeting was supposed to be routine. Quarterly financial review, project updates, budget approvals for the upcoming season. Instead, Ryan announced that he and Marcus had been discussing a restructuring of company leadership. We think it would be more efficient to formalize the division of responsibilities, Ryan explained, distributing typed documents that I was seeing for the first time. Marcus will be promoted to Chief Operating Officer, handling all client relations and business development. I'll remain as Executive Vice President, overseeing all project management and construction operations. I waited for him to continue, to explain my role in this new structure. Instead, Marcus spoke up. Marcus, we've created a new position for you, Director of Internal Operations. You'll handle scheduling, procurement, quality control, administrative oversight, all the behind-the-scenes work that keeps projects running smoothly. I stared at the document in front of me. Director of Internal Operations was essentially a project manager position with a fancier title. It removed me from client contact, business development, strategic planning, and decision-making authority. It was a demotion disguised as a reorganization. This is because of the Pinnacle situation, I said. This is because we need clearly defined roles and responsibilities, Ryan replied. Too much overlap creates confusion and inefficiency. Dad nodded slowly. The boys have put a lot of thought into this. I think it makes sense to formalize everyone's strengths. I looked around the table at my family, the men who'd taught me that Walker Construction was our shared legacy, that we were building something together that would last for generations. But in that moment, I realized that we had never included me as an equal partner. I'd been allowed to participate as long as I didn't challenge the established order. And if I don't agree to this restructuring, the silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Dad spoke. Son, sometimes we have to trust that the people who've been doing this longer know what's best for the business. It wasn't a threat, exactly, but it was a clear indication that my opinion wasn't really being sought. It was being informed. I signed the document that day, but something fundamental had shifted. The company I'd thought was partially mine had revealed itself to be something I was merely allowed to work for, as long as I stayed within carefully defined boundaries. That night, I sat in my apartment, looking out at the Phoenix skyline, and thinking about the conversation I'd had with Dr. Chen. The excitement in her voice when we discussed sustainable building practices, the genuine interest in innovative solutions, the possibility of creating something meaningful rather than just profitable. For the first time since graduating, I allowed myself to imagine what it might be like to build something of my own. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I didn't know it then, but that moment of quiet rebellion would set in motion a series of events that would ultimately reshape not just my relationship with my family, but the entire legacy of Walker Construction. The collapse, when it came, would be swift and brutal. But in that April evening, sitting alone with the city lights spread out below me, I was just a man trying to figure out whether loyalty to family was worth sacrificing his own vision of what was possible. The answer, as it turned out, would cost me everything I thought I wanted, and give me everything I didn't know I needed. The decision to leave Walker Construction didn't happen overnight. It built slowly, like pressure behind a dam, until the moment when everything finally gave way. For 3 months after the restructuring, I threw myself into my new role as Director of Internal Operations with a determination that surprised even me. If my brothers wanted to see whether I could handle administrative responsibilities, I would show them exactly what efficient operations looked like. I digitized our entire procurement system, implemented inventory tracking software that reduced material waste by 18%, and created project scheduling protocols that improved our on-time completion rate. The work was satisfying in its own way, but it felt like solving puzzles with pieces missing. I could optimize processes and improve efficiency, but I had no input on which projects we pursued or how we positioned ourselves in the market. I was becoming very good at managing the machinery of a business I no longer felt connected to. The real test came in June, when we were approached by Desert Springs University about renovating their science complex. The project involved updating laboratories, installing new HVAC systems, and modernizing electrical infrastructure across 4 buildings. It was exactly the kind of technical, detail-oriented work that required careful coordination between multiple trades and precise scheduling to minimize disruption to ongoing classes. Ryan assigned me to handle the logistics coordination, which meant I would oversee material deliveries, schedule subcontractors, manage timeline conflicts, and ensure that all work was completed according to university requirements. It was the largest operational project I'd been given since the restructuring, and I was determined to execute it flawlessly. The first challenge came when I discovered that our usual electrical subcontractor had overcommitted and couldn't guarantee completion within our timeline. The university had specifically requested that all work be finished before the fall semester began, leaving us with a hard deadline that couldn't be adjusted. I spent 2 days calling electrical contractors throughout Arizona, finally finding a firm in Tucson that specialized in educational facility work and had the capacity to meet our schedule. The new contractor, Southwestern Electric Solutions, was more expensive than our usual subcontractor, but they had extensive experience with university projects and could guarantee completion 2 weeks ahead of our deadline. More importantly, they had capabilities we'd never utilized before. They specialized in energy-efficient lighting systems and could install smart building controls that would reduce the university's long-term energy costs. When I presented the contractor comparison to Ryan, I included all the relevant information, cost differences, timeline benefits, and the additional capabilities that Southwestern Electric could provide. I tried to frame it as a straightforward operational decision, but I couldn't help mentioning the energy efficiency components. The lighting upgrade would qualify the university for state energy rebates, I explained, and the smart building controls could reduce their electrical costs by 15 to 20% annually. Ryan listened to my presentation without interrupting, but I could see his jaw tighten when I mentioned the energy components. After I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus, what did we discuss about staying focused on your responsibilities?" "This is my responsibility. I'm recommending the contractor who can best meet our project requirements." "Your responsibility is operational coordination, not upselling clients on services they didn't request." "They didn't request it because they don't know it's available. If we present them with options that save money and improve building performance, why wouldn't we do that?" Marcus had been listening from the doorway, and now he stepped into the office. "Because that's not what they hired us to do. They hired us to renovate their science complex, not to redesign their entire energy infrastructure. It's the same work, just with better components and smarter controls." Ryan stood up from his desk. "Marcus, here's what's going to happen. You're going to call our regular electrical contractor and work out a timeline that meets the university's requirements. If that means bringing in additional crews or paying overtime rates, that's what we'll do. That approach will cost more and deliver less value. It will deliver exactly what the client expects from Walker Construction: reliable work, completed on schedule, using contractors we trust." I left that meeting feeling like I'd been slapped. The conversation wasn't really about electrical contractors or energy efficiency. It was about my place in the company hierarchy and my brother's determination to keep me within the boundaries they'd established. But I couldn't let it go. That evening, I called Desert Springs University's facilities director, Tom Morrison, to clarify some details about the project timeline. During our conversation, I mentioned that we'd identified some opportunities to improve the energy efficiency of the renovated buildings at minimal additional cost. "That's interesting. We're always looking for ways to reduce operational expenses. What kind of improvements are you talking about?" I spent 20 minutes explaining the lighting and building control options, careful to present them as optional upgrades rather than necessary components of the renovation. Tom asked detailed questions about cost savings, implementation timelines, and maintenance requirements. By the end of the conversation, he was genuinely excited about the possibilities. "Marcus, can you put together a formal proposal for these upgrades? I'd like to present this to our sustainability committee. If the numbers work out, this could be exactly what we need to justify the renovation budget to the board." I agreed to prepare the proposal, knowing full well that I was stepping outside my defined role again. But the enthusiasm in Tom's voice reminded me why I'd gotten into this business in the first place: the satisfaction of solving problems and creating value that went beyond the minimum requirements. I spent the weekend developing a comprehensive upgrade proposal. I researched equipment costs, calculated energy savings, identified applicable rebates and tax incentives, and created a detailed implementation timeline that would integrate seamlessly with our existing renovation schedule. The numbers were compelling. The energy upgrades would pay for themselves within 3 years and continue savings for decades. Monday morning, I walked into Ryan's office with a printed copy of the proposal. "Before you say anything," I began, "just look at the numbers." Ryan glanced at the document without picking it up. "Marcus, what part of 'stay in your lane' did you not understand?" "The part where staying in my lane means missing opportunities that could benefit our client and our company. You called the university without authorization. I called to clarify project details, which is part of my operational coordination responsibilities. The efficiency upgrades came up naturally during our conversation." Marcus appeared in the doorway again, drawn by the rising tension in our voices. "What's this about?" Ryan handed him the proposal. Marcus skimmed the first page, his expression growing darker with each paragraph. "Jesus, Marcus, you developed an entire secondary proposal without discussing it with us first?" "I developed a response to a client inquiry. Tom Morrison specifically asked for this information." "After you planted the idea in his head?" Ryan said. The accusation stung because it was partially true. I had mentioned the efficiency opportunities knowing that Tom would be interested. But I'd done it because I genuinely believed it was the right thing to do for both the university and our company. "Ryan, look at the proposal. Really look at it. This upgrades project would add $200,000 to our contract value and position us as the kind of contractor that delivers innovation, not just basic construction services." Ryan finally picked up the document, but instead of reading it, he dropped it directly into his trash can. "Marcus, you're fired." The words hit me like cold water. I stood there for a moment, not quite processing what he'd said. "What?" "You're fired. Clean out your office. Turn in your company credit card and keys. Security will escort you out." Marcus looked stunned. "Ryan, don't you think that's a little extreme? Maybe we should have done this months ago," Ryan interrupted. "Marcus has been undermining our authority and freelancing his own agenda since he got back from graduate school. This is just the final example of behavior that we can't tolerate anymore." I found my voice. "You're firing me for trying to win additional business for our company?" "I'm firing you for insubordination, for repeatedly ignoring direct instructions, and for putting your personal agenda ahead of company interests. My personal agenda is sustainable construction practices that happen to align with market demand and client needs. Your personal agenda is proving that you're smarter than the rest of us," Marcus said quietly. "And frankly, Marcus, you're not." That final comment cut deeper than anything else they'd said. It wasn't just professional disagreement anymore. It was personal dismissal of my capabilities, my education, my entire approach to business. "Fine," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I'll clean out my office." As I walked down the hallway toward my office, I could hear Ryan on the phone with building security. By the time I reached my desk, a security guard was already waiting in the corridor outside my door. The humiliation was complete and public. I packed my personal belongings into 2 cardboard boxes: books, a few framed photos, some awards from graduate school, and the sustainable construction research I'd been accumulating for 2 years. Everything else belonged to Walker Construction, including the computer where I developed the university proposal and the files containing months of work on operational improvements. 26 minutes after Ryan fired me, I was standing in the parking lot beside my car, holding 2 boxes and wondering what the hell I was going to do next. That evening, I called my father. "Dad, I need you to know that Ryan fired me today." There was a long pause. I heard, "Ryan called me about an hour ago." "What did he tell you?" "He told me that you'd been working against company interests and that the situation had become untenable." "Do you want to hear my side?" Another pause. "Son, I've been watching this situation develop for months. I know you feel like your brothers don't appreciate your ideas, but sometimes the best way to show respect for a family business is to support the decisions that the senior partners make. Even when those decisions leave money on the table and ignore client needs? Even when you disagree with them. That's what loyalty means. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the 2 boxes I'd carried home from the only job I'd ever wanted. My father's words echoed in my head. That's what loyalty means. But I couldn't understand how loyalty to my family required abandoning my own judgment and professional capabilities. The next morning, I started looking for work. The construction industry in Phoenix was tighter than I'd expected. Walker Construction had a solid reputation, and word traveled fast in our community. Within a week, I learned that Ryan had been proactive about managing the narrative of my departure. The story he was telling, that I'd been let go for insubordination and freelancing, was spreading through industry networks faster than I could counter it. 3 construction firms turned down my applications without explanation. 2 others offered me positions that were significant steps down from what I'd been doing at Walker Construction. Junior project manager roles that would have been appropriate for someone 5 years younger with no management experience. The 4th company I approached was different. Verde Construction was a mid-sized firm that specialized in commercial and residential sustainable building. They were exactly the kind of company I'd been hoping Walker Construction could become: profitable, growing, and positioned at the forefront of industry innovation. Their founder, Elena Rodriguez, had built the company from nothing over 15 years, focusing specifically on environmentally conscious construction practices. I found Elena's office in a converted warehouse in downtown Phoenix. The building itself was a showcase of sustainable renovation. Solar panels on the roof, rainwater collection systems, reclaimed materials throughout the interior. It felt like stepping into the future I'd been trying to create at Walker Construction. Elena interviewed me personally, asking detailed questions about my experience, my education, and my vision for sustainable construction. She'd heard about my departure from Walker Construction, but instead of seeing it as a red flag, she seemed intrigued by the circumstances. "So, you were fired for proposing energy efficiency upgrades that would have benefited your client and increased your company's revenue?" she asked. "Essentially, yes. My brothers felt I was overstepping my role and undermining their authority." Elena laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement. "That's exactly the kind of overstepping we encourage here. We want people who see opportunities and pursue them, not people who stay within arbitrary boundaries." She offered me a position as senior project manager, with a salary that was 15% higher than what I'd been earning at Walker Construction. More importantly, she offered me the opportunity to work on projects that aligned with my professional interests and values. "We are not just building structures," Elena explained. "We're demonstrating that sustainable construction is not only environmentally responsible, but economically superior. Every project is an opportunity to prove that doing the right thing is also the profitable thing." I accepted the position immediately. Working at Verde Construction was like discovering that I'd been holding my breath for years without realizing it. Every day brought new challenges that required innovation rather than routine execution. My colleagues shared my interest in sustainable building practices, and our clients specifically sought us out because of our environmental expertise. Within 2 months, I was managing 3 significant projects simultaneously: a LEED Platinum office complex, a net-zero energy residential development, and the renovation of a historic downtown building using cutting-edge sustainable technologies. Each project pushed me to learn new techniques, explore emerging technologies, and collaborate with specialists I'd never worked with before. The work was more demanding than anything I'd done at Walker Construction, but it was also more satisfying. I was finally using my education and capabilities to their full potential, and the results were tangible. Our projects won industry awards, attracted positive media attention, and generated referrals from satisfied clients. More importantly, Verde Construction was profitable. Our sustainable building expertise allowed us to charge premium rates while delivering measurable value to clients through reduced operational costs and improved building performance. For the first time since leaving graduate school, I felt like I was building something meaningful. But success at Verde Construction created an unexpected complication. It highlighted the growing gap between my professional growth and my family relationships. Dad called me every few weeks, ostensibly to check on how I was doing, but really to gauge whether I might be ready to return to Walker Construction. These conversations followed a predictable pattern. He would ask about my new job, I would share some highlights, and he would suggest that I'd probably learned enough about the industry to come back and apply my experience to the family business. Son, you've proven your point about sustainable construction. Maybe it's time to bring that knowledge home, where it belongs. Dad, I didn't leave to prove a point. I left because Ryan and Marcus made it clear that there wasn't room for my approach within Walker Construction. People change, Marcus. Situations evolve. Maybe they'd be more receptive to your ideas now that you've gotten some experience implementing them. These conversations were painful because I could hear the hope in Dad's voice, the desire to see his 3 sons working together again, rebuilding the unity that had been fractured by our professional disagreements. But I couldn't ignore the reality of what had happened or pretend that a few months of separation had fundamentally changed my brother's attitudes towards sustainable construction. The breaking point came in November during a chance encounter at an industry conference. The Arizona Construction Association's annual conference was the largest gathering of construction professionals in the state. Verde Construction had a booth in the exhibition hall, and I was representing our company at several panel discussions about sustainable building practices. It was exactly the kind of event I'd always wanted to participate in, sharing knowledge, building professional relationships, and positioning our company as a thought leader in environmental construction. On the second day of the conference, I was presenting on a panel about energy-efficient building systems when I spotted Ryan and Marcus in the audience. They were sitting near the back, arms crossed, wearing expressions that suggested they were more interested in monitoring my presentation than learning from it. After the panel concluded, I made my way through the crowd toward the exhibition hall, hoping to avoid a confrontation. But Ryan intercepted me near the entrance. "Interesting presentation," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Thank you, it's good to see you." Marcus joined us, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Marcus, we need to talk." "About what?" "About the fact that you're working for one of our competitors and using information you learned at Walker Construction to build their business." The accusation was so unexpected that I almost laughed. "Ryan, everything I presented today is public information. Building codes, industry standards, equipment specifications, none of it is proprietary to Walker Construction. The client relationships are." "What client relationships?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a news article about Verde Construction's latest project, the Desert Springs University Science Complex renovation that I'd originally proposed while working for Walker Construction. "You stole our client," Marcus said. I stared at the article, my stomach dropping. The university had indeed hired Verde Construction to complete the energy efficiency upgrades I'd proposed, but I'd had nothing to do with that decision. "I didn't even know Verde had bid on this project," I said honestly. "But you developed the proposal while you were working for us," Ryan replied. "You used company time and resources to create a plan that you then gave to our competitor. I never gave Verde Construction any information about the university project. Elena won this contract because she submitted a better proposal. A proposal based on work you did for Walker Construction." The logic was twisted but persistent. In my brother's minds, any success I achieved outside of Walker Construction was inherently theft from Walker Construction. They couldn't accept that I might have legitimate capabilities and knowledge that didn't belong exclusively to them. "Ryan, the university wanted energy efficiency upgrades. Walker Construction chose not to provide them. Verde Construction chose to pursue the opportunity. That's how competition works." "That's how betrayal works," Marcus said. The word hung in the air between us like a physical barrier. Betrayal. Not disagreement, not professional divergence, but betrayal of family loyalty and business ethics. I looked at my brothers, 2 men I'd grown up with, learned from, and respected for most of my life, and realized that we were speaking completely different languages. They saw family business as a zero-sum game, where any external success diminished their own standing. I saw professional growth as an expanding opportunity where everyone could benefit from innovation and improved practices. "If that's how you see it," I said finally, "then we don't have anything else to discuss." I walked away from that conversation knowing that the rift between my brothers and me had become permanent. There would be no reconciliation, no gradual rebuilding of trust, no eventual return to Walker Construction. We had chosen different paths, and those paths were leading us in opposite directions. But I underestimated how far Ryan and Marcus were willing to go to protect what they saw as their territory. 2 weeks after the conference, I received a call from Elena Rodriguez asking me to come to her office immediately. Her voice carried an urgency that made me cancel my afternoon appointments and drive directly to Verde Construction's headquarters. Elena was waiting in her office with our company attorney, David Kim, and our head of business development, Sarah Martinez. The atmosphere was tense before anyone spoke. "Marcus, we've received a legal notice from Walker Construction," Elena said, sliding a document across her desk. I scanned the letter quickly, then read it more carefully, my disbelief growing with each paragraph. Walker Construction was alleging that I had violated non-compete agreements, stolen proprietary information, and engaged in unfair business practices by sharing confidential client information with Verde Construction. "This is ridiculous," I said. "I never signed a non-compete agreement with Walker Construction, and I've never shared any confidential information." David Kim leaned forward. "The allegations are indeed questionable, but we need to take them seriously. Walker Construction is claiming that your work on the university project violated your fiduciary duties as a family business partner. I wasn't a partner when I developed the Verde Construction proposal. I was an employee here. But you were a partner when you originally proposed the energy efficiency upgrades to the university," Sarah pointed out. The legal complexity was frustrating but straightforward. Walker Construction was arguing that any ideas I'd developed while working for them belonged to them permanently, even after my employment ended. They were seeking an injunction to prevent Verde Construction from completing the university project and monetary damages for lost business opportunities. "How strong is their case?" I asked David. "Legally, it's weak. They don't have non-compete agreements, and the information you used is widely available industry knowledge. But litigation is expensive and time-consuming, regardless of legal merit." Elena had been quiet throughout the discussion, but now she spoke with the calm authority that had built Verde Construction into a regional leader. "Marcus, I need to know exactly what happened with this university project. Not the legal implications, just the facts." I spent 30 minutes walking through the entire timeline. My original proposal at Walker Construction, Ryan's rejection, my conversation with the university facilities director, the development of the upgraded proposal, and my eventual termination. I explained that I'd never discussed the university project with anyone at Verde Construction and had no knowledge of their bid until after the contract was awarded. When I finished, Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Here's what we're going to do," she said finally. "We're going to fight this aggressively. Not because we have to, but because the principle matters. Walker Construction is trying to use legal intimidation to prevent competition, and that's exactly the kind of behavior that stifles innovation in our industry. Elena, this is going to be expensive. Maybe we should consider settling." "Marcus, Verde Construction was built on the principle that sustainable construction practices represent the future of our industry. If we back down from this fight, we're essentially agreeing that innovation belongs to established companies and that individuals don't have the right to pursue better solutions." She stood up from her desk and walked to the window overlooking downtown Phoenix. "Besides," she continued, "I've dealt with companies like Walker Construction before. They're counting on us being intimidated by legal costs and backing down quietly. But if we stand our ground, they'll discover that litigation works both ways." David Kim raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Elena smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "I mean that Walker Construction's business practices probably don't look as clean under legal scrutiny as they'd like to believe. Companies that use intimidation tactics usually have something to hide. That afternoon, David Kim filed a countersuit against Walker Construction, alleging harassment, unfair business practices, and abuse of legal process. Within a week, Elena's prediction proved accurate. Walker Construction's attorneys reached out to discuss settlement negotiations. But the legal battle, even though it ended in our favor, had consequences I hadn't anticipated. The industry attention surrounding the lawsuit made my break with Walker Construction public knowledge throughout Arizona's construction community. There was no possibility of rebuilding professional relationships with my brothers after such a visible and contentious legal conflict. More importantly, the stress of the lawsuit had taken a toll on my father's health. Dad called me in December, 3 weeks after the settlement was finalized. "Son, I need you to come home. We need to talk." His voice sounded older than I'd ever heard it, fragile in a way that scared me. "Dad, are you okay?" "Just come home, Marcus, please." I drove to my parents' house that evening, arriving to find Dad sitting alone in his study, surrounded by file boxes and legal documents. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of the last year had physically diminished him. "Dad, what's all this?" He gestured toward the boxes. Estate planning documents, business succession plans, things I should have organized years ago. I sat down across from him, confused by the urgency in his voice. "Why now?" "Because the doctors found something, son. Something that's going to require more attention than I can give while trying to run a construction company." The words hit me like a physical blow. What kind of something? The kind that means I don't have as much time as I thought I did to fix the mistakes I've made. We talked for 3 hours that night. Dad explained that he'd been diagnosed with early-stage pancreatic cancer, a discovery made during routine blood work that had revealed elevated enzyme levels. The prognosis was manageable but serious. Treatment would require his full attention and energy. More importantly, the diagnosis had forced him to confront the reality that Walker Construction needed a succession plan that accounted for the fractured relationships between his sons. "Marcus, I know your brothers made mistakes. I know I made mistakes too, not stepping in when I should have, not insisting that we find ways to work together instead of against each other. Dad, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. I built this company to be something I could pass on to my sons, but instead of bringing you together, it's driven you apart. That's not the legacy I wanted to leave." He pulled a manila folder from one of the boxes and handed it to me. "I've been working with attorneys to restructure the company ownership. Ryan and Marcus will retain operational control, but the majority ownership will transfer to a family trust that includes all 3 of you equally." I opened the folder and scanned the legal documents. The structure was complex but clear. Ryan and Marcus would continue running day-to-day operations, but major strategic decisions would require unanimous agreement from all 3 brothers. It was an attempt to force collaboration through legal necessity. "Dad, Ryan and Marcus will never agree to this." "They'll agree because the alternative is selling the company entirely. Without a clear succession plan, Walker Construction won't survive my retirement." I spent the next 2 weeks thinking about Dad's proposal. The legal structure would give me veto power over my brother's decisions, but it would also trap all 3 of us in a relationship that had already proven dysfunctional. More importantly, it would require me to leave Verde Construction and return to a company where I'd never felt truly welcomed or valued. In the end, I decided that forcing cooperation through legal mechanisms was unlikely to produce the kind of genuine partnership that Dad envisioned. But I agreed to one concession. I would serve as a consultant to Walker Construction, providing input on sustainable construction opportunities while maintaining my position at Verde Construction. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but allowed everyone to save face while moving forward with their own priorities. For 6 months, the arrangement worked reasonably well. I attended monthly meetings at Walker Construction, reviewing potential projects and offering recommendations about sustainable building opportunities. Ryan and Marcus listened politely to my input, occasionally implementing minor suggestions that didn't require significant changes to their established practices. But everything changed in July, when Desert Springs University announced a major expansion project that would dwarf the science complex renovation. The university had received a $50 million donation to build a new engineering and technology center, and they specifically wanted the building to serve as a showcase of sustainable construction practices. The project would include advanced renewable energy systems, innovative building materials, cutting-edge environmental controls, and educational components that would allow students to study the building's performance in real time. It was exactly the kind of project that could establish Walker Construction as a leader in sustainable commercial construction. But it was also exactly the kind of project that required the innovative approach my brothers had consistently rejected. When Elena Rodriguez told me that Verde Construction had been invited to submit a proposal, I realized that I was facing an impossible choice. I could honor my consulting agreement with Walker Construction and help them develop a competitive bid, potentially costing Verde Construction a contract that aligned perfectly with our capabilities. Or I could recuse myself from the process entirely, abandoning my family's company when they needed my expertise most. The decision would define not just my professional future, but my relationship with my family for the rest of my father's life. And I had less than 2 weeks to make it. The choice between family loyalty and professional integrity consumed my thoughts for days. I found myself staring at blueprints without seeing them, attending meetings without hearing the conversations, going through the motions of my work at Verde Construction while my mind wrestled with an impossible decision. Elena noticed my distraction during a project review meeting. After the other team members left, she asked me to stay behind. "Marcus, you've been somewhere else for the past week. What's going on?" I explained the situation with the university expansion project, the consulting agreement with Walker Construction, and the ethical dilemma I was facing. Elena listened without interrupting, her expression growing more thoughtful as I outlined the competing obligations. "So you're asking whether you should help your family's company compete against us for a contract that could define both companies' futures," she summarized. "I'm asking whether there's a way to handle this situation that doesn't betray someone I care about." Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. "Marcus, let me ask you something. If Verde Construction wins this contract, what happens to your relationship with your family? It probably ends permanently. And if Walker Construction wins, then I've helped them succeed using expertise they rejected when I tried to contribute it as their employee. That's not what I'm asking. If they win, do you think they'll suddenly value your contributions and invite you back as an equal partner?" The question cut straight to the heart of my self-deception. No, they'll see it as proof that their approach works and my departure was unnecessary drama. So either way, you lose your family relationship. The only question is whether you also sacrifice your professional integrity in the process. Elena's analysis was brutal but accurate. I'd been hoping that helping Walker Construction would somehow repair our fractured relationship, but that hope was based on wishful thinking rather than realistic assessment of my brother's attitudes. "There's a third option," Elena continued. "You could recuse yourself from both proposals and let each company compete on their own merits. That feels like abandoning everyone. Or it feels like maintaining your integrity while allowing each company to demonstrate their actual capabilities." That evening, I called my father and explained my decision to recuse myself from the university project entirely. I would honor my consulting agreement by providing general guidance on sustainable construction practices, but I wouldn't participate in developing specific proposals for projects where Verde Construction was also competing. Dad was quiet for a long time after I finished explaining. "Son, I understand your position, but I need you to understand mine. This project could secure Walker Construction's future for the next decade. Without it, we're going to struggle to compete with firms that have sustainable construction expertise. Dad, Ryan and Marcus have had 2 years to develop that expertise. They chose not to. They chose to focus on what they knew worked. Maybe that was short-sighted, but they were trying to protect what we'd built. And now they need capabilities they don't have because they rejected the person who could have helped them develop those capabilities." The conversation ended without resolution, but I felt a sense of relief at having made a clear decision. I wouldn't help either company with the university project, but I would continue providing general consulting to Walker Construction as agreed. 2 weeks later, both companies submitted their proposals to Desert Springs University. Verde Construction's proposal was everything I'd expected: innovative, comprehensive, and meticulously detailed. Elena had assembled a team of specialists who could deliver every aspect of the university's sustainability requirements while staying within budget and timeline constraints. The proposal showcased projects we'd completed, demonstrated our expertise with advanced building systems, and provided detailed performance guarantees that reflected our confidence in sustainable construction technologies. Walker Construction's proposal, which I learned about secondhand through industry contacts, was exactly what I'd feared. Ryan and Marcus had partnered with external consultants to address the sustainability requirements, but their approach was fundamentally reactive rather than proactive. They were promising to hire expertise rather than demonstrating existing capabilities, and their timeline reflected the learning curve they would face in implementing unfamiliar technologies. The university's decision was announced 3 weeks later. Verde Construction won the contract, but the margin was closer than anyone expected. Walker Construction's proposal had been competitive enough to reach the final selection round, which suggested that my brothers were capable of adapting when circumstances forced them to do so. But winning the contract came with an unexpected consequence for me personally. 2 days after the announcement, I received a call from Ryan. His voice was controlled but angry in a way I hadn't heard since we were children. "Congratulations, Marcus. You got what you wanted." "Ryan, I didn't participate in Verde's proposal development. I recused myself from the entire process." "You recused yourself from helping us, but you didn't recuse yourself from working for the company that beat us." "That's not how it happened." "That's exactly how it happened. You had information about our capabilities and limitations from your consulting work and used that knowledge to benefit Verde Construction's position. The accusation was unfair and inaccurate, but I could understand the logic from Ryan's perspective. My continued employment with Verde Construction had created the appearance of conflict, even though I'd carefully avoided actual conflicts of interest. Ryan, I never shared any information about Walker Construction's proposal with Verde. You didn't have to share specific information. Just working for them while consulting for us created an advantage." The conversation escalated quickly from there, with Ryan accusing me of deliberate sabotage and me defending decisions I'd made in good faith. By the time we hung up, whatever remained of our professional relationship had been severed completely. 3 days later, I received a formal letter terminating my consulting agreement with Walker Construction, citing irreconcilable conflicts of interest and incompatible business loyalties. I was officially expelled from the family business for the second time in 18 months. The termination of my consulting agreement marked the beginning of a period of complete estrangement from my brothers. They stopped returning my calls, declined invitations to family gatherings where I would be present, and made it clear through mutual contacts that they considered our relationship permanently ended. Dad tried to mediate, organizing family dinners and holiday gatherings where he hoped we could find common ground. But these events became exercises in polite hostility, with Ryan and Marcus treating me like an unwelcome stranger who happened to share their last name. The situation was heartbreaking for Dad, whose cancer treatment was progressing well, but who was watching his family disintegrate despite his efforts to hold us together. During one of our private conversations, he expressed regret about the consulting agreement and the false hope it had created for reconciliation. "I thought if I could get you boys working together again, you'd remember that you're family first and business competition second. Dad, maybe we were never as close as you thought we were. Maybe the business just hid our fundamental differences. Or maybe success made your brothers forget what really matters." That comment stayed with me because it suggested that Dad's perspective on the family conflict was more nuanced than he'd previously revealed. He wasn't just disappointed that we couldn't work together. He was questioning whether Ryan and Marcus had lost sight of values he'd tried to instill in all of us. Meanwhile, my career at Verde Construction continued to flourish. The University Engineering Center project became a showcase for advanced sustainable construction techniques, attracting industry attention and generating referrals that positioned Verde as a regional leader in environmental building practices. I was promoted to Director of Sustainable Construction, a role that allowed me to shape company strategy while managing our most innovative projects. Professional success provided some compensation for family estrangement, but it couldn't eliminate the sadness of losing relationships that had defined my identity for most of my life. I'd grown up thinking that Walker Construction was my destiny, that working with my brothers was the natural culmination of my education and ambitions. Discovering that those assumptions were false required rebuilding my understanding of who I was and what I wanted to achieve. The process was painful, but ultimately liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I was pursuing goals that reflected my own values rather than trying to fit into expectations established by others. I was building something meaningful rather than just maintaining something inherited. But liberation came with loneliness, especially during family occasions when the absence of my brothers was a constant reminder of what I'd lost. Everything changed on a Thursday morning in March when Dad's attorney called and asked me to come to his office immediately. "Marcus, I need to inform you that your father passed away peacefully in his sleep last night." The words didn't register at first. Dad's cancer treatment had been going well. His energy levels had improved, and we'd been making plans for him to attend Verdict Instruction's groundbreaking ceremony for the university project. His death was sudden and unexpected, a heart attack likely triggered by the stress his body had endured during months of treatment. The funeral was surreal. Ryan and Marcus made arrangements without consulting me, choosing a service that reflected their relationship with Dad rather than acknowledging the complexities of our family dynamics. I sat in the back of the church, surrounded by construction industry colleagues and family friends, feeling like an observer at someone else's grief. During the reception afterward, people approached me with condolences that carried undertones of confusion about my absence from Walker Construction. Many assumed I was still involved with the family business and made comments about continuing Dad's legacy through the company he'd built. I found myself explaining repeatedly that I worked elsewhere, that my relationship with Walker Construction had ended, that Dad's legacy would be continued by Ryan and Marcus. These conversations were exhausting and painful, but they also clarified something important. Dad's reputation in the community was built on integrity, generosity, and commitment to excellence, values that transcended any specific business or family arrangement. His legacy wasn't Walker Construction itself, but the principles he demonstrated throughout his career. The reading of Dad's will was scheduled for the following week, a formality that I expected would confirm Ryan and Marcus's ownership of Walker Construction while providing me with some modest inheritance reflecting my estrangement from the family business. I was wrong. The will reading took place in the conference room of Dad's attorney's office, the same space where we'd discussed business succession planning months earlier. Ryan and Marcus sat across the table from me, wearing dark suits and expressions of resigned patience. They clearly expected this meeting to be brief and straightforward, a legal confirmation of arrangements they already understood. Dad's attorney, William Hayes, had handled Walker family legal matters for over 20 years. He knew all of us personally and understood the conflicts that had developed within our family. As he began reading the will, his tone was professional but careful, as if he were navigating through potentially explosive territory. The first sections of the will addressed personal bequests, charitable donations, and provisions for our mother. These were substantial but unsurprising. Dad had always been generous with community organizations and had ensured that Mom would be financially secure for the rest of her life. Then William reached the section addressing Walker Construction. To my sons Ryan and Marcus Walker, who have dedicated their careers to continuing the operational excellence of Walker Construction, I leave the following: all construction equipment, current project contracts, client relationships, and operational assets of Walker Construction, along with sufficient working capital to ensure business continuity during the transition period. Ryan and Marcus exchanged satisfied glances. This was exactly what they'd expected: operational control of the business they'd been running for years. But William continued reading. However, the ownership of Walker Construction, including all real estate, intellectual property, business name, and future development rights, I leave entirely to my son Marcus Walker, who has demonstrated the vision and capabilities necessary to guide the company's future growth. The silence in the room was absolute. Ryan's face went white, then red. Marcus leaned forward as if he hadn't heard correctly. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. William looked up from the document. It means that Marcus inherits 100% ownership of Walker Construction, while you and Ryan inherit the operational assets necessary to continue running construction projects. That's impossible, Ryan said. Dad wouldn't structure the inheritance that way. William reached for a second document. Your father included a letter explaining his reasoning. He handed me the letter, but I gestured for him to read it aloud. Whatever Dad had written, my brothers deserved to hear it directly. William cleared his throat and began reading Dad's words. To my sons, the decision I've made about Walker Construction reflects lessons I've learned too late about leadership, vision, and family loyalty. Ryan and Marcus, you are both capable managers who have served the company faithfully. But management and leadership are not the same thing. Over the past 3 years, I've watched Marcus propose innovations that could have secured our company's future, only to see those proposals rejected not on their merits, but because they challenged established practices. I've watched him pursue those same innovations successfully elsewhere, demonstrating capabilities that Walker Construction could have utilized if we had been wise enough to recognize their value. Most importantly, I've watched him maintain his integrity and professional standards even when doing so cost him his place in the family business. William paused, glancing around the table at our faces. Ryan was staring at his hands. Marcus was shaking his head. I felt like I was listening to someone else's story. The letter continued. Marcus, you inherit Walker Construction not as a reward but as a responsibility. The company needs the vision and capabilities you've developed, and the construction industry needs companies that can adapt to changing environmental and economic realities. I trust you to transform Walker Construction into the kind of company it should have become years ago, while maintaining the values of quality and integrity that built our reputation. William finished reading and folded the letter carefully. There are additional provisions addressing the transition process and ensuring fair compensation for Ryan and Marcus's contributions to the company. But the fundamental structure is clear. Marcus owns Walker Construction, effective immediately. The meeting continued for another hour as William explained the legal and financial details, but I absorbed very little of the specific information. I was trying to process the reality that Dad had not only given me the company my brothers had expelled me from, but had done so specifically because of the conflicts that had driven us apart. Ryan and Marcus asked questions about their severance packages, the timeline for transitioning operational control, and their options for challenging the will. William answered professionally, but made it clear that Dad had structured the inheritance carefully to withstand legal challenges. As the meeting concluded, Marcus turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, not anger or disappointment, but something closer to bewilderment. Marcus, what are you going to do? It was a reasonable question with profound implications. I could sell Walker Construction and eliminate the complications of inheriting a company where I'd never been welcomed as an equal. I could maintain the status quo and allow Ryan and Marcus to continue operating the business while I collected ownership profits. Or I could do what Dad had apparently expected, transform Walker Construction into the sustainable construction leader I'd always believed it could become. The responsibility was daunting, but the opportunity was exactly what I'd been preparing for my entire career. Walking out of that attorney's office, I understood that I wasn't just inheriting a construction company. I was inheriting the chance to prove that sustainable construction practices weren't just environmentally responsible, but economically superior. I was inheriting the opportunity to demonstrate that innovation and tradition could coexist. Most importantly, I was inheriting the responsibility to honor Dad's legacy by building something worthy of the values he'd tried to instill in all of us. The transformation wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't repair my relationship with Ryan and Marcus. But for the first time since leaving graduate school, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Dad had given me more than a company. He'd given me the chance to fulfill the vision I'd been carrying for years, and the validation that my approach to business was worth pursuing, even when it required standing alone. The inheritance was just the beginning. The real work would be proving that his faith in me was justified. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.